The baby's scream cut through the howling blizzard like a knife through Samuel Thornton's chest. He had heard wolves dying, men begging horses, screaming in agony, but nothing like this. Nothing so small, nothing so desperate, nothing so close to death. He found them behind the abandoned mill. A woman collapsed face down in the snow, her frozen fingers still clutching a bundle of rags. Inside that bundle, a baby girl was crying with the last breath her tiny lungs could manage. In that moment, Samuel made a choice that would destroy his life and save theirs. This is their story. Stay until the end. Hit that subscribe button and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind hit Samuel Thornton like a fist as he urged his horse forward through the blinding snow. December in the Colorado mountains was no place for a man alone, but he had no choice. The supply run to Leadville had taken longer than expected, and now the storm that old miners had warned about was swallowing the world whole. "Come on, boy," he muttered to his horse, a sturdy buckskin named Soldier. "Just a few more miles to Silver Creek. You can make it." Soldier's ears flattened against the wind. The horse had carried Samuel through worse Apache territory, cattle stampedes, a bullet wound that should have killed them both. But this cold was different. This cold wanted them dead. Samuel pulled his coat tighter, squinting through the white curtain of snow. He knew these mountains, knew every trail, every creek, every abandoned cabin where a man could shelter. The old Henderson mill should be coming up on his left, a landmark that meant Silver Creek was less than 3 miles away. That's when he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks. The storm could make sounds that drove men mad, screaming, laughing, calling their names. But this sound was different. This sound was real. A baby crying. Samuel yanked Soldier to a halt. "Whoa, boy, whoa!" He listened, his breath freezing in the air. The wind howled. Snow pelted his face. And there it was again, thin, weak, barely audible over the storm. A baby's cry. "That ain't possible," Samuel said aloud. "No one would be out here with a child. No one would be foolish enough to—" The cry came again, weaker this time. Samuel dismounted before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. His boots sank into snow up to his knees. He grabbed his rifle habit more than necessity and pushed toward the sound, toward the dark shape of the Henderson mill looming through the storm. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone there?" No answer but the wind. And the crying. Always the crying. He found them behind the mill's collapsed wall in a shallow depression where the structure blocked some of the wind. A woman lay face down in the snow, motionless, her dark hair spread around her like a halo of ice. Her dress was torn, her feet bare and blue, and her frozen fingers were locked around a bundle pressed against her chest. The bundle was moving. The bundle was crying. "Jesus Christ," Samuel breathed. He dropped to his knees beside them, ignoring the cold that immediately soaked through his trousers. His hands shook as he touched the woman's neck, searching for a pulse. There. Faint. Rapid. But there. "Ma'am. Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. Her skin was like ice beneath his fingers. How long had she been out here? An hour. 2. In this storm that was a death sentence, the baby's cry had faded to a whimper. Samuel looked at the bundle, at the tiny face barely visible through the frost-covered rags. A girl, he realized. A baby girl with blue lips and closed eyes, her small body shaking with cold and hunger. "Hold on, little one," he said, his voice rough. "I got you now, both of you." He had to move fast. The woman needed warmth, shelter, a doctor. The baby needed milk, heat, someone who knew what the hell they were doing with infants, which wasn't him. But Silver Creek was still 3 miles away, and in this storm, 3 miles might as well be 30. Samuel stripped off his coat without thinking. It was the only warm thing he had, and the cold immediately bit into him like a living thing, but he didn't hesitate. He wrapped the coat around the baby first, creating a cocoon that would trap whatever body heat the child had left. The baby's eyes opened. Blue eyes, impossibly blue, staring up at him with something that looked almost like recognition. Her tiny hand emerged from the coat and grabbed his thumb. Something shifted in Samuel's chest. Something he couldn't name and didn't want to examine. "That's right," he murmured. "You hold on. Don't you let go." Getting the woman onto Soldier was the hardest thing Samuel had ever done. She was dead weight, her body stiff with cold, and every second he spent maneuvering her was a second the storm was trying to kill them all. But finally, he got her draped across the saddle, secured with rope from his pack, and the baby tucked inside his shirt against his chest. The cold was unbearable without his coat. Samuel could feel his body heat bleeding away, his fingers going numb, his thoughts slowing. But the baby was warm against him, her small heartbeat a counterpoint to his own, and that was enough. That had to be enough. "Walk on, Soldier," he commanded. "Get us home." Silver Creek appeared through the storm like a ghost town. Dark buildings, empty streets, shuttered windows. It was past midnight, Samuel reckoned, and sensible folk were in bed where they belonged. But the doctor's office had a light burning, thank God. Doc Hawkins was an old army surgeon who never turned anyone away. Samuel's fist hammered against the door. Doc Hawkins, I need help." The door opened to reveal Ezekiel Hawkins, a gray-haired man in his 50s with tired eyes that went sharp the moment he saw what Samuel was carrying. "Good Lord," Hawkins said. "Bring them in, now." The next minutes were a blur of activity. Hawkins took command like the battlefield surgeon he'd once been barking orders to his wife Martha, who'd appeared in her nightgown, but moved with practiced efficiency. They got the woman onto the examination table, got the baby into Martha's arms, got Samuel into a chair before his legs gave out. "Who are they?" Hawkins asked, working over the woman with quick professional hands. "Don't know. Found them behind the Henderson mill." In this storm. What were they doing out there? "Dying," Samuel said flatly. They were dying. Martha had unwrapped the baby and was examining her with gentle fingers. "This little one is starving, Zeke. When's the last time she was fed?" "Can't have been recent. Look at her mama." Samuel looked. Really looked. The woman was young, maybe 24 or 25, with a face that would have been pretty if it weren't so pale and gaunt. Her cheekbones stood out sharply, her collarbones visible through her torn dress. She'd been hungry long before the storm found her. But that wasn't what made Samuel's blood run cold. It was the bruises, yellow-green marks on her jaw, fading purple around her wrists, a pattern of wounds that told a story anyone with eyes could read. "Someone did this to her," Samuel said quietly. Hawkins met his eyes. "Yes, someone did. Who? That's a question for when she wakes up. If she wakes up." Hawkins turned back to his patient. "Martha, get some milk warming, and find something to feed this child. Samuel, I need you to help me here. She's hypothermic. We need to get her warm slowly, or her heart will give out." For the next hour, Samuel did whatever Hawkins told him to do. He heated blankets. He filled hot water bottles. He held the woman's ice-cold hand and rubbed warmth into it while Hawkins worked on her feet. He watched the color slowly, agonizingly slowly return to her skin. Martha fed the baby drops of warm milk from a cloth, and the child drank like she'd never tasted anything so good. Her cries faded to satisfied murmurs, and eventually she fell asleep in the older woman's arms. "She's a fighter," Martha said softly, looking down at the baby. "Both of them are." "They'd have to be," Samuel said, "to survive what they went through." Around 4 in the morning, the woman's eyes fluttered open. She jerked awake with a gasp, her hands immediately going to her chest, searching for something. Someone. "My baby." The words tore out of her throat raw and desperate. "Where's my baby?" "She's right here." Martha moved quickly, bringing the sleeping infant into the woman's line of sight. "She's safe. She's fed. She's warm." The woman stared at her daughter for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then her eyes moved around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The strange people, the man sitting in the corner watching her with concerned eyes. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "Who are you people?" "You're in Silver Creek, Colorado," Hawkins said gently. "My name is Dr. Ezekiel Hawkins. This is my wife, Martha. And that man there is Samuel Thornton. He's the one who found you." The woman's eyes locked onto Samuel. He saw fear there, deep, instinctive fear, but also something else. Confusion, disbelief. "You found us." "Yes, ma'am, behind the Henderson mill. You were nearly frozen." I don't remember." She closed her eyes, her face contorting with effort. "The storm. I was walking. Grace was crying. I couldn't keep going." "You collapsed," Samuel said. "If I'd come by an hour later, you'd both be dead." The bluntness of his words made her flinch, but she didn't look away. "Why did you stop?" "I heard your baby crying." "But why did you help?" "You don't know us. You don't owe us anything." Samuel didn't have an answer for that. He'd asked himself the same question during the endless ride through the storm, during the hours of working to keep her alive. Why had he stopped? Why had he given up his coat, risked his own life for strangers? "Because I couldn't ride past," he said finally. "Not with a baby crying like that. Not with a woman dying in the snow." Something in her expression cracked. The fear was still there, but underneath it Samuel saw exhaustion, relief, the look of someone who'd been running for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. "What's your name, ma'am?" Martha asked softly. The woman hesitated. Samuel could see her weighing her options, deciding how much to reveal. "Hannah," she said finally. "Hannah Prescott. And my daughter is Grace." "Well, Hannah, you're safe here," Hawkins said. "No one's going to hurt you. You need to rest, recover your strength. You're severely dehydrated, malnourished, and you've got frostbite on 3 of your toes. It's going to be a long road back." "I can't stay." Hannah tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back against the pillows, her face gray with effort. "I have to keep moving. He'll find me. He always finds me." "Who?" Samuel leaned forward. "Who's looking for you?" Hannah's eyes went wide with panic. "I can't tell you. If I tell you, he'll hurt you too. I shouldn't have let you help me. I should have—" "Ma'am." Samuel's voice was firm but gentle. "Hannah, look at me." She did, her chest heaving with frightened breaths. "Whoever he is, he ain't here. You're in Silver Creek now, and nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. Not while I'm breathing. You don't understand. He's powerful, rich. He has lawyers' connections, men who do whatever he tells them. You can't stop him. No one can stop him." "Maybe not," Samuel admitted, "but I can sure as hell try." The story came out in pieces over the next 2 days as Hannah drifted in and out of consciousness. Martha stayed with her, constantly feeding her broth and water, caring for little Grace, when Hannah was too weak to hold her. And Samuel couldn't seem to leave. He told himself it was just concern, just the natural interest of a man who'd saved 2 lives. But every time Hannah opened her eyes, every time Grace grabbed his finger with her tiny hand, every time he heard Hannah's voice telling another fragment of her nightmare, he felt himself getting pulled deeper into something he didn't understand. Her full name was Hannah Louise Prescott, born Hannah Louise Warren in Boston, Massachusetts. Her father had been a respectable merchant, her mother a schoolteacher. She'd been educated, cultured, raised to believe that life was fair and people were essentially good. Then she'd married Cornelius Augustus Blackwood. He was handsome, Hannah said quietly, staring at the ceiling while Grace slept in the cradle beside her bed. Charming. My father thought he was perfect, a wealthy mine owner from Colorado, respectable family back in Philadelphia. I was 19. I didn't know any better. When did it start? Martha asked gently. The wedding night. Hannah's voice was flat empty. He didn't like the way I looked at him. Said I wasn't showing proper respect. He hit me so hard I saw stars, and then he told me that's what happened to wives who forgot their place. Samuel's hands had curled into fists. He forced them open, forced himself to breathe. I tried to leave after the first month, Hannah continued. He caught me at the train station, dragged me home by my hair. The punishment for that was worse. After that, I learned to be quiet, to be small, to be whatever he wanted me to be. What changed? Samuel asked. Why run now? Hannah turned her head to look at Grace sleeping peacefully, with no knowledge of the world's cruelty. Her. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't let my child grow up watching what he did to me. I couldn't let her learn that love looks like bruises and fear, so I waited. I planned. I saved money when I could, hiding coins in Grace's things where Cornelius would never look. And when Grace was born, I ran. A ghost of a smile touched Hannah's cracked lips. God help me, I ran with a 2-week-old baby and nothing but the clothes on my back. Got as far as Denver before his men found me. Samuel's jaw tightened. What happened? He came himself that time, dragged me out of the boarding house in front of everyone, told them all I was his insane wife who'd kidnapped his child. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? He's Cornelius Blackwood. He owns half the silver in Leadville. But you got away again. 3 months later, he had business in San Francisco, left me with just 2 guards. I drugged their coffee with laudanum and walked out the door. Hannah closed her eyes. I've been running for 6 days. Walked most of it after the horse went lame. I thought if I could just get far enough, find a town small enough that he wouldn't think to look. You found Silver Creek, Martha said. I found a blizzard, Hannah corrected. I found death. And then, she opened her eyes and looked at Samuel. Then I found him. Samuel didn't know what to say. What could you say to a woman who'd been through hell and somehow kept fighting? What words could possibly be adequate? You're safe now, he said. It felt inadequate, but it was true. As long as you're in Silver Creek, you're under my protection. Cornelius Blackwood can go straight to hell. Hannah laughed, a broken, surprised sound like she'd forgotten laughter existed. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what he's capable of. I know what he did to you. That tells me everything I need to know. He'll destroy you. He destroys everyone who helps me. Let him try. There was steel in Samuel's voice, a certainty that surprised even him. He'd been a drifter his whole adult life, a man with no ties, no responsibilities, no one depending on him. He'd liked it that way. Freedom was everything to a cowboy. But looking at Hannah, at her bruised face and broken spirit, and the fierce love in her eyes when she looked at her daughter, Samuel felt something shift inside him. Some piece of armor he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it was there, suddenly felt unbearably heavy. This woman had been through hell. She'd fought and clawed and nearly died to give her baby a chance at a real life. And somewhere out there, a monster was hunting her, ready to drag her back to a prison that looked like a mansion but was really a cage. Samuel couldn't walk away from that. Couldn't pretend he hadn't seen what he'd seen, hadn't heard what he'd heard. Couldn't go back to his solitary existence knowing that Hannah and Grace were out there somewhere running from a man who would never stop chasing them. Rest now, he said gruffly, standing up. You're going to need your strength. For what? Samuel didn't answer. He didn't know yet. All he knew was that somehow, impossibly, a baby's cry in a blizzard had changed everything. 2 days later, Hannah was strong enough to sit up in bed. 4 days later, she could walk short distances with help. Grace was thriving under Martha's care, gaining weight, her cries strong and healthy now instead of weak and desperate. The town of Silver Creek had noticed their new arrivals. People are talking. Sheriff Walter Mitchell told Samuel over coffee at the general store. Mitchell was a good lawman, fair and thorough, the kind of man who asked questions first and shot later. Woman shows up half dead with a baby, mysterious bruises, won't say where she came from. Folks are curious. Let them be curious. Samuel. Mitchell set down his cup. I've known you 10 years. You're a good man, but you're also the most solitary son of a bitch I've ever met. Now suddenly you're spending all your time at Doc Hawkins' place, watching over a woman you never met before. What's really going on? Samuel considered lying, considered deflecting, but Mitchell was going to find out eventually, and better it came from Samuel than from town gossip. Her name's Hannah Prescott. Her husband's Cornelius Blackwood. Mitchell's face went still. The mine owner? From Leadville. The same. Christ, Samuel, you know who that man is? You know what kind of power he has. I know what he did to his wife. I know he beat her bloody and left her afraid of her own shadow. I know she ran from him with a newborn baby and nearly died in that blizzard rather than go back. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. That's a serious accusation. Look at her face, Walter. Look at her wrists. Tell me those bruises came from falling downstairs. Even if you're right, I am right. Even if you're right, Mitchell repeated. Cornelius Blackwood isn't the kind of man you can just accuse. He's got lawyers, politicians, half the territorial government in his pocket. If he decides he wants his wife back, there's not much legal standing to stop him. Then we'll find a legal standing. Mitchell sighed, rubbing his forehead. Samuel, listen to me. I understand wanting to help. Lord knows I do. But you need to think about what you're getting yourself into. This isn't some saloon fight or cattle dispute. This is a rich, powerful man with unlimited resources coming after you for harboring his wife. She's not his property, Walter. She's a human being who chose to leave. The law doesn't always see it that way. Samuel's coffee had gone cold. He stared into the dark liquid, thinking about Hannah's eyes, the fear in them, but also the strength. Thinking about Grace's tiny hand wrapped around his finger. Thinking about his mother years ago and the sounds that had come from his parents' bedroom late at night. Then the law is wrong, he said quietly, and I'm going to stand between her and that law and her husband, and anyone else who tries to take her back to that hell. Mitchell studied him for a long moment. Something in the sheriff's expression softened. You always were a stubborn bastard, he said finally. Fine. If Blackwood comes to my town making trouble, I'll do what I can. But Samuel, be careful. Men like him don't fight fair. Neither do I. Not when it matters. That evening, Samuel found Hannah sitting in a chair by the window of the Hawkins' spare room, Grace sleeping in her arms. The storm had finally passed, and weak winter sunlight filtered through the glass, catching the red highlights in Hannah's brown hair. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. Mr. Thornton? Samuel, please. Or Sam. Nobody calls me Mr. Thornton except people trying to serve me court papers. A small smile touched her lips. Samuel, then. She hesitated. Martha told me you've barely left since you brought us here, that you've been sleeping in the chair downstairs. Doc Hawkins has a comfortable chair. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Hannah's eyes met his directly. Why are you doing this? You saved our lives. That's more than anyone else has ever done. You don't owe us anything more. Samuel pulled up a stool and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. Can I tell you something, Hannah? Of course. When I was 12 years old, my pa used to beat my ma. Not every day, just when he was drunk, which was most days. I was too small to stop him, too scared to try. One night, he went too far and she didn't get up again. Hannah's breath caught. After that, I made myself a promise. I promised that if I ever saw a man hurting a woman, I wouldn't be too small and I wouldn't be too scared. I'd do something about it, even if it killed me. Samuel. I heard your baby crying in that storm and something in me just shifted. I can't explain it better than that. You needed help and I was there to give it, that's all. Hannah was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. You could have ridden past. Anyone else would have. Then anyone else is a damn fool. Samuel's voice was rough. You're a person, Hannah. Not property, not a possession, not something to be owned. You deserve to live without fear. Grace deserves to grow up knowing what a real home feels like, and if I can help give you that, well, that seems like a better use of my life than drifting from one cattle drive to the next. Grace stirred in Hannah's arms, her blue eyes opening. She looked at Samuel and made a happy gurgling sound, reaching toward him. "She knows you," Hannah said softly. "She always calms down when you're here. She's got good taste." Samuel extended his finger, and Grace grabbed it immediately, holding on with surprising strength. "Hello, little one. You being good for your mama?" Grace babbled something that might have been an answer. Hannah watched them, and something in her expression changed. The fear was still there. Samuel suspected it would always be there, at least for a while, but underneath it was something new, something like hope. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "I can't stay at Dr. Hawkins forever. I don't have money, don't have anywhere to go. Cornelius will find me eventually. He always does. Boy. Then we make sure you're ready when he comes." "How?" Samuel had been thinking about this for days. He didn't have all the answers, didn't know if his plan would work, but it was the only thing that made sense. "You need protection," he said. "Legal protection, not just a cowboy with a rifle. If you're married to Cornelius, he has rights to you under the law. But if you were married to someone else—" Hannah's eyes went wide. "You can't mean—" "I'm not asking for anything," Samuel said quickly. "I know we've only known each other a few days. I know you've got no reason to trust any man after what you've been through. But a marriage, even a marriage in name only, would give you standing. Would make it harder for Cornelius to just take you back. You would do that, tie yourself to a woman you barely know with a child that isn't yours running from a dangerous man. I would." "Why?" Samuel looked at Grace, still clutching his finger, her blue eyes bright with innocent trust. "Because that baby there grabbed my hand and didn't let go. Because you looked at me like I was the first person who'd ever actually seen you. Because I've spent my whole life being free, and I just realized that freedom don't mean much if you've got no one to share it with." Hannah was trembling. "You're asking me to trust you. After everything Cornelius did, after every promise he made and broke, you're asking me to believe that you're different." "I am asking that. And I know it's the hardest thing in the world." Samuel met her eyes steadily. "But I'm also telling you that you don't have to decide right now. You don't have to decide tomorrow. You can take as long as you need and I'll still be here, protecting you, helping you, asking nothing in return. That's not how marriage works. Maybe not, but it's how partnership works. And that's what I'm offering Hannah. Not a man who owns you, but a partner who stands beside you, whatever you decide." Grace chose that moment to yawn enormously, her tiny mouth opening wide before she settled back against Hannah's chest and closed her eyes. Hannah looked down at her daughter for a long moment. When she looked up again, her eyes were clearer than Samuel had ever seen them. "I need time," she said, "to think, to heal, to learn whether I can ever trust anyone again." "Take all the time you need." "But Samuel, thank you for the offer, for everything." She reached out and touched his hand, the first voluntary touch she'd initiated since he'd found her. "You're a good man. I'd forgotten men like you existed." Samuel covered her hand with his own, gentle, careful, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. "Rest now," he said softly. "Tomorrow's a new day, and whatever comes after that, we'll face it together." Outside the window, the last light of the winter sun faded into darkness. Somewhere out there, Cornelius Blackwood was searching for his wife. Somewhere out there, danger was gathering like a storm on the horizon. But here in this small room in Silver Creek, Colorado, 3 broken people had found something that felt almost like hope. And sometimes, hope was enough to start. The days that followed moved slowly, each one bringing Hannah closer to strength and further from the terror that had driven her through the blizzard. She began eating solid food again, walking without help, holding Grace for longer stretches, without her arms trembling from exhaustion. Samuel came every morning and every evening, never pushing, never demanding, just present. He would sit in the corner of the room and whittle small animals from scraps of wood while Hannah nursed Grace or talked with Martha. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Either way, Hannah found herself watching the door for him, listening for his footsteps on the stairs. It frightened her, this growing dependence. Cornelius had taught her that needing anyone was dangerous, that trust was a weapon others used against you. But Samuel never raised his voice, never made her feel small, never looked at her like she was property to be managed. He looked at her like she mattered. "You're staring again," Martha said one afternoon, a knowing smile on her face. Hannah jerked her attention away from the window where Samuel was chopping firewood in the yard below. "I wasn't staring." "Of course not. You were just admiring the snow. The wood pile. It's very organized." Martha laughed, a warm sound that filled the small room. "Child, I've been married 40 years. I know what a woman looks like when she's watching a man." "It's not like that." Hannah's cheeks burned. "I'm not ready for anything like that. I may never be ready." "Nobody said you had to be." Martha settled into the chair beside her, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "But Hannah, can I tell you something? Something I learned the hard way." "Of course." "Fear and caution aren't the same thing. Caution keeps you safe. Fear keeps you trapped." Martha's eyes were kind but serious. "What Cornelius did to you was evil. Pure evil. And you have every right to be cautious about trusting again. But don't let his evil make you afraid of goodness when it's standing right in front of you." Hannah looked down at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "How do I know the difference? How do I know Samuel won't change once he has me? Cornelius was charming too in the beginning. You watch. You wait. You pay attention to the small things." Martha leaned forward. "Cornelius hit you on your wedding night. Samuel has been here 10 days now, and what's the worst thing he's done?" Hannah thought about it. Really thought. He snores when he falls asleep in the chair." Martha smiled. "That's what I thought." That evening, Samuel brought her a book. "Found it at the general store," he said, almost shy about it. "Martha mentioned you used to like reading before. Well, before. Thought you might want something to pass the time." Hannah took the worn volume with trembling hands. It was a collection of poetry, dog-eared and well-loved. "Samuel, this must have cost. Doesn't matter what it cost. It matters to me." She clutched the book to her chest. "No one's given me a gift in years. Cornelius gave me things, but they were always transactions, rewards for good behavior, bribes to keep me quiet. This ain't a bribe. It ain't a reward. It's just a book." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "You don't have to make it into something more than it is." But it was more. They both knew it was more. "Thank you," Hannah whispered. "Truly." Samuel nodded once, gruff and awkward, and retreated to his usual chair. But Hannah saw the pleased look on his face before he ducked his head, and something warm unfurled in her chest. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe goodness did look different from charm when you paid attention. The news came 3 days later. Sheriff Mitchell arrived at the Hawkins house with a grim expression that made Hannah's blood run cold before he'd even spoken a word. "There's been inquiries," he said, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands. "Man came through town yesterday asking questions. Well-dressed fellow said he was looking for a woman and baby who'd gone missing from Leadville." Hannah's arms tightened around Grace so hard the baby whimpered. "What did you tell him?" Samuel demanded. "Nothing. Told him I hadn't seen anyone matching that description." Mitchell's jaw was tight. "But Samuel, he's not going to stop. He was asking at every business on Main Street. Someone's going to talk eventually." Who was he? One of Blackwood's men. Didn't give a name, but he had the look of hired help, if you know what I mean. The kind of man who asks questions with his fists when words don't work. Hannah felt the room spinning around her. He found me, already. I thought I'd have more time. You have time, Samuel said firmly. One hired man asking questions doesn't mean Blackwood knows where you are. Could be he's got men searching every town between here and San Francisco. Or he could be on his way right now. Hannah's voice cracked. I should go. I should leave before he gets here. If I keep moving. If you keep moving, you'll die. Samuel crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt in front of her chair, his face level with hers. You nearly froze to death in that blizzard, Hannah. Grace nearly starved. What happens if you run again, and the next person who finds you isn't me? What happens if I stay and Cornelius comes? You'll get hurt. Everyone who helps me gets hurt. Then let me get hurt. Samuel's voice was fierce. Let me make that choice. You've spent years having choices taken away from you. Don't take mine away now. Hannah stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Why? Why do you care so much? You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you walked through a blizzard with a baby in your arms, rather than stay with a man who hurt you. I know you're stronger than you think and braver than you believe. I know that little girl there deserves a mother who's free, and you deserve a life that's yours. Samuel's hand covered hers, gentle and warm. That's enough, Hannah. That's more than enough. Grace began to cry, picking up on her mother's distress. Hannah rocked her automatically, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm so scared. I know, but you don't have to be scared alone anymore. Sheriff Mitchell cleared his throat awkwardly. I hate to interrupt, but we need to make some decisions. If Blackwood or his men come to Silver Creek officially, I'll need to know how to handle it. Handle it how? Samuel asked. Legally, Hannah is still his wife. If he shows up with proper documentation demanding her return, I don't have standing to refuse. Then we change her legal status. Samuel stood, his jaw set. Hannah, I know I said you could take all the time you needed, but circumstances have changed. If you're willing, you want to marry me. The words came out flat empty. So Cornelius can't claim me. I want to protect you. Marriage is the best way I know how. Hannah looked at Grace, who had quieted and was watching her mother with wide blue eyes. She looked at Sheriff Mitchell standing uncomfortable in the doorway. She looked at Martha and Dr. Hawkins, who had appeared from the back room and were watching with worried faces. And she looked at Samuel, at his honest eyes and work-roughened hands and the stubborn set of his jaw. I can't be a real wife to you, she said quietly. Not the way you might want, not the way a man has a right to expect. I don't expect anything. You say that now, but what about in a month? A year? When you realize you've tied yourself to a broken woman who flinches when you raise your hand and cries in her sleep. Then I'll lower my hand slower and hold you when you wake up. Hannah's breath caught. Cornelius had never spoken to her like that. No one had ever spoken to her like that. What if I can never love you? What if I'm too damaged to love anyone? Then you'll be my wife who doesn't love me, and I'll still be grateful for every day I get to spend protecting you and Grace. Samuel's voice was rough with emotion. Hannah, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to let me stand between you and the man who hurt you. That's all. Everything else we figure out together at your pace or never at all. The room was silent. Everyone waiting. Hannah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the enormity of what she was being asked to trust. She thought about Cornelius, about the wedding night when he'd shown her his true face, about years of walking on eggshells, of apologizing for existing, of praying for death, just so the pain would stop. She thought about Samuel, about the coat he'd wrapped around her baby, about the way he held Grace like she was precious, about 10 days of patience and kindness and never once making her feel afraid. Maybe she would regret this. Maybe Samuel would change the way Cornelius had changed. Maybe she was making the worst mistake of her life. But Grace deserved a chance. Grace deserved a father who wouldn't hurt her mother, who wouldn't teach her that love meant fear. If nothing else, Hannah owed her daughter that chance. "Yes," she whispered. Samuel's face went still. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. God help us both, but yes." The wedding happened 3 days later in the small church at the edge of Silver Creek. It wasn't much of a ceremony, just Judge Abraham Wheeler reading from his worn Bible while a handful of witnesses looked on. Hannah wore a borrowed dress of pale blue that brought out her eyes, and Grace wore the white gown that Martha had been saving for a grandchild she'd never had. Samuel wore his cleanest shirt and stood ramrod straight like a man facing a firing squad. "Do you, Samuel Jacob Thornton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." His voice was steady, certain. "And do you, Hannah Louise Prescott, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Hannah looked at Samuel. At this man who had appeared out of a blizzard, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was making. She thought about the life she was leaving behind and the uncertain future she was stepping into. "I do." Judge Wheeler smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. Samuel, you may kiss your bride." Samuel hesitated, looking at Hannah with a question in his eyes, asking permission even now, even when he had every right to claim what was legally his. Hannah rose on her tiptoes and pressed a quick, chaste kiss to his lips. It lasted barely a second, but she felt him trembling against her. "Mrs. Thornton," he murmured. The name sounded strange, foreign, but also somehow safe. "Mr. Thornton," she replied. They signed the papers. They accepted congratulations from the small gathering of witnesses. They walked out of the church as husband and wife, and Hannah felt the winter sun on her face and wondered if this was what freedom felt like. Samuel had arranged for a room at Widow Crawford's boarding house, the finest accommodation Silver Creek had to offer. It was small but clean, with a real bed and a cradle for Grace, and a window that looked out over the main street. "I'll sleep in the chair," Samuel said as they stood awkwardly in their new quarters. "Or on the floor, whatever you're comfortable with." Hannah looked at the bed, then at Samuel, then back at the bed. The old fear stirred in her chest, but it was fainter now, more distant. "The bed is big enough for two," she said carefully, "as long as you stay on your side." "I will, I promise. And if I have nightmares, you'll understand if I wake up screaming." "I'll understand. And if I cry, you won't try to touch me. Not unless I ask." "Not unless you ask." Hannah let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Then I think we can make this work." They settled into an awkward routine. Samuel helped with Grace when Hannah was tired, which was often. He brought meals up from the boarding house kitchen and sat with her while she ate. He told her stories about his years on the cattle trails, about horses he'd known, and men he'd ridden with, and the strange beauty of the open range. In return, Hannah told him about Boston, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father who had loved her but sold her to a monster because he couldn't see past Cornelius's money, about the dreams she'd had before her marriage of becoming a teacher and filling children's minds with wonder. "You could still do that," Samuel said one evening. "Be a teacher, I mean." "Who would hire me? Silver Creek doesn't have a proper school. Kids here learn what their parents can teach them, which ain't much. If you offered lessons, I reckon plenty of families would be interested." The idea sparked something in Hannah that she'd thought was dead. Purpose. Possibility. A future that was more than just surviving day to day. "You think I could?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to." Hannah smiled a real smile that reached her eyes. Samuel looked startled, like he'd forgotten what her smile looked like. Maybe he'd never seen it properly before. "No one's ever believed in me like that," she said softly. "Then everyone you've known before was a fool." A week passed, then two. Hannah grew stronger every day, and with strength came confidence. She started taking walks through town, Grace bundled against the cold in a sling Martha had made. She introduced herself to shopkeepers and neighbors, and if they noticed her fading bruises or heard the whispers about where she'd come from, they were polite enough not to mention it. Samuel went back to work at the livery stable, but he was never gone long. He came back at lunch to check on her, and every evening he was home before dark. Home. It felt strange to think of it that way, but the boarding house room had started to feel like home, and somewhere along the way, Samuel had started to feel like home too. She didn't love him, not yet. Maybe not ever. But she liked him. She trusted him more each day. And when he smiled at her across the breakfast table, when he made silly faces at Grace, just to hear her laugh when he lay beside her in the dark, and kept his hands carefully to himself, even though she could feel the wanting in him. Hannah felt something growing in her chest that she was afraid to name. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the wedding, that Cornelius Blackwood rode into Silver Creek. Hannah was at the general store when it happened, buying thread for the mending she'd started doing to earn a little money. She heard the horse's first expensive hooves on the frozen street, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a town like this. She looked up, and her heart stopped. Cornelius sat astride a black stallion flanked by two rough-looking men on horses of their own. He was dressed impeccably despite the long ride, his coat spotless, his hat perfectly tilted. He looked exactly the way he had on their wedding day, handsome and charming, and absolutely terrifying. His eyes swept the street, searching, hunting. They found her. For one frozen moment, they stared at each other through the general store window. Hannah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there like a rabbit caught in a wolf's gaze. Cornelius smiled. It was the smile he used before he hit her, gentle and cold, and full of promised violence. He dismounted and started toward the store. Hannah's paralysis broke. She grabbed Grace tight against her chest and ran. She burst out the back door and into the alley, her feet slipping on the ice, her breath coming in panicked gasps. She could hear Cornelius calling her name, that honeyed voice that had haunted her nightmares for years. "Hannah, Hannah, darling, there's no need to run. I'm not angry, I just want to talk." She ran faster. The livery stable was 3 blocks away. Samuel was there. Samuel would protect her. She just had to get to Samuel. But Cornelius was faster. He cut through the buildings knowing somehow where she would go, and suddenly, he was in front of her, blocking the alley, his 2 men flanking him like walls of muscle. "Hannah." His voice was soft, almost tender. "You've led me quite a chase." She backed up until she hit the wall behind her, clutching Grace so tight the baby started to cry. "Stay away from me." "Stay away. Darling, I'm your husband. I've come to take you home." "This is my home now. I'm not going anywhere with you." Cornelius's smile didn't waver, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "I've heard interesting rumors, Hannah. Rumors about a marriage, about a cowboy who thinks he can steal another man's wife. I'm not your wife anymore. I'm Samuel's wife, legal and witnessed." "Legal." Cornelius laughed, and the sound made Hannah's skin crawl. "You were married to me first. Any judge in the territory will recognize that your little frontier ceremony was invalid. Bigamy, Hannah. That's what they call it. You can't take me. I won't go." "You will go." All pretense of gentleness vanished. Cornelius stepped closer, and Hannah could smell his cologne, the same scent she'd learned to associate with pain and fear. "You will come with me quietly, or I will destroy everyone in this pathetic town who helped you, starting with that cowboy." Grace was wailing now, sensing her mother's terror. Hannah pressed back against the wall, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear the way she used to disappear when Cornelius raised his hand. But she wasn't the same woman who had cowered in their Philadelphia mansion. She had walked through a blizzard. She had survived. She had found people who believed in her, who saw her as something more than property. She was Hannah Thornton now. And Hannah Thornton didn't cower. "Touch me," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "and Samuel will kill you." Cornelius's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. He found me dying in the snow and saved my life. He married me to protect me from you. Do you really think he'll let you take me without a fight?" "One cowboy against me?" Cornelius scoffed. "I have lawyers. I have money. I have the law on my side. You have nothing." Hannah forced herself to meet his eyes, to hold his gaze the way she'd never been able to do before. "You have nothing because I'm not afraid of you anymore. You can hurt me, Cornelius. You can probably take me back by force, but you'll never own me again. That part of me, the part that belonged to you, died in that blizzard." For one moment, something like uncertainty flashed across Cornelius's face. He wasn't used to defiance. He wasn't used to his property fighting back. Then his expression hardened. "We'll see about that." He turned to his men. "Take her." The larger man stepped forward, reaching for Hannah's arm, and a rifle shot cracked through the cold air. The man stumbled backward, a hole in his hat, where the bullet had passed an inch from his skull. Everyone froze. Samuel stood at the end of the alley rifle, raised another round already chambered. His face was carved from stone, and his eyes were fixed on Cornelius with murderous intent. "Touch my wife," he said quietly, "and the next one goes through your head." Cornelius turned slowly, taking in this new threat with calculating eyes. "You must be the cowboy. And you must be the coward who beats women." Samuel walked forward, his rifle never wavering. "Hannah, come here." Hannah didn't hesitate. She ran to Samuel's side, Grace still crying against her chest, and felt his free arm come around her shoulders. Protective, safe. "This doesn't concern you," Cornelius said. "Hannah is my wife. I have every legal right to take her home." "She ain't your wife anymore. She's mine. We got papers that say so. Papers that will be invalidated the moment I bring this matter before a proper court." Cornelius's voice was smooth, confident. "You're out of your depth, cowboy. I suggest you step aside before you get hurt. I suggest you get on your horse and ride out of Silver Creek before I put you in the ground." The two men stared at each other, and Hannah could feel the violence crackling in the air between them. Cornelius's hired men had their hands on their guns. Samuel's rifle was steady and sure. One wrong move and people would die. "Samuel," Hannah whispered, "please, don't. I won't let him take you. And I won't let you die for me." She stepped in front of him, putting herself between the rifle and Cornelius. "Please, there has to be another way." Sheriff Mitchell's voice cut through the standoff. "What in the hell is going on here?" The sheriff came around the corner with his deputy, both men armed, both men looking ready for trouble. Mitchell took in the scene with quick eyes, his hand resting on his pistol. "Cornelius Blackwood, I presume?" Cornelius straightened his charming mask, sliding back into place. "Sheriff, I'm here to collect my wife, who has been illegally harbored in your town." "That woman there?" Mitchell nodded toward Hannah. "She's not your wife, Mr. Blackwood. She's Mrs. Hannah Thornton, married 3 weeks ago in my presence. I witnessed the ceremony myself. A ceremony that was invalid given that she was already married to me. That's for a judge to decide. In the meantime, you're disturbing the peace." Mitchell's voice hardened. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave Silver Creek." "Leave?" Cornelius laughed. "Sheriff, do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea what I can do to you and this pathetic excuse for a town? I know exactly who you are, Mr. Blackwood. I also know that right now, you're outnumbered and outgunned." Mitchell's hand tightened on his pistol. "You can leave peacefully, or you can leave in pieces. Your choice." For a long, terrible moment, Hannah thought Cornelius would fight. She could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing his options, measuring his chances. Then he smiled, that cold, terrible smile. "Very well, Sheriff. I'll leave. For now." He turned to Hannah, and his eyes were like ice. But this isn't over, darling. Not by a long shot. I'll be back with lawyers and court orders, and when I am no frontier sheriff or cowboy husband will be able to stop me. Get out of my town, Mitchell said flatly. Cornelius mounted his horse with elegant grace, his men following suit. He looked down at Hannah one last time, and his voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. You were mine the moment you said, I do, Hannah. You'll always be mine. And when I take you back, I'll make sure you never forget it. Then he was gone, riding out of Silver Creek with his men behind him, leaving nothing but the echo of hooves and the promise of violence to come. Hannah stood in the alley, Grace crying in her arms, Samuel's hand on her shoulder, and felt the brief flame of hope that had been growing in her chest flicker and dim. He was coming back. He would always come back. And no matter how far she ran, no matter who protected her, Cornelius Blackwood would never stop hunting her. Hannah. Samuel's voice was gentle. Hannah, look at me. She did. His face was worried, but determined, his eyes full of something that looked almost like love. He's not going to take you, Samuel said firmly. I don't care what he does or who he brings. You're my wife now, and I protect what's mine. You don't understand, Hannah whispered. He always wins. He always wins. Then he's due for a loss. Samuel pulled her close, and Hannah let herself lean into his warmth. Let herself believe just for a moment that maybe he was right. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time she had found something strong enough to stand against the monster who had owned her for so long. Grace's crying had faded to whimpers. Hannah rocked her gently, murmuring comfort she didn't feel. What do we do now? She asked. Now we prepare, Samuel said. He's coming back with lawyers and court orders. Fine. We'll have our own lawyers and our own evidence. We'll show every judge in Colorado what he did to you. You think that will matter? Rich men don't go to jail for beating their wives? Maybe not. But we make enough noise, we tell enough people, and his reputation suffers. Men like Blackwood care more about their reputation than anything else. Samuel's jaw was tight. We fight him, Hannah. We fight him with everything we've got. And if that doesn't work? If that doesn't work? Samuel's hand moved to his rifle. Then we fight him a different way. Hannah looked up at her husband, at this man who had appeared from nowhere, and offered her everything she'd stopped believing was possible. He wasn't handsome the way Cornelius was handsome. His face was too rough, his hands too calloused, his manner too blunt. But he looked at her like she mattered. He touched her like she was precious. He spoke to her like her opinions counted. And he was willing to die for her. I don't deserve you, she said softly. That's funny. Samuel's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I was thinking the same thing about you. The days after Cornelius left were filled with a strange mixture of dread and determination. Samuel threw himself into preparations with the single-minded focus of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. He rode to Denver and returned 3 days later with a young lawyer named Jonathan Whitfield, a sharp-eyed man who listened to Hannah's story without interruption and then said the words she'd been desperate to hear. We can fight this. We can win. Hannah wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. But years of losing had taught her that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. How? She asked, her voice barely steady. Cornelius has money, power, connections. What do we have? Whitfield leaned forward, his expression intense. We have the truth. We have witnesses who saw your condition when you arrived. We have a doctor who documented your injuries. And most importantly, we have you. Me? Your testimony, Mrs. Thornton. If you're willing to stand in front of a judge and tell him exactly what Cornelius Blackwood did to you, we have a chance. Hannah's hands started to shake. She could feel Samuel's eyes on her, warm and worried, but she couldn't look at him. The thought of standing in a courtroom, of speaking those words out loud, of reliving every nightmare, while Cornelius watched with that cold smile on his face. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can. Samuel's voice was firm. But you don't have to decide right now. Take some time. Think about it. There isn't much time, Whitfield warned. Blackwood's lawyers have already filed papers with the territorial court. The hearing is set for 3 weeks from now in Denver. If Hannah doesn't appear to contest, the judge will rule in Blackwood's favor by default. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare for the fight of her life. Hannah looked at Grace sleeping peacefully in Martha's arms across the room. Her daughter would never remember this, would never know the sacrifices her mother had made, the fears she had faced. All Grace would know was the life that came after whatever that life turned out to be. Freedom or captivity. Safety or danger. Samuel or Cornelius. "I'll do it," Hannah said, and her voice was stronger than she'd expected. "I'll testify." The preparations began immediately. Whitfield interviewed everyone who had seen Hannah in those first days after Samuel brought her in from the storm. Dr. Hawkins provided detailed medical records of her injuries. Martha gave a statement about the bruises, the frostbite, the malnutrition. Sheriff Mitchell documented the confrontation in the alley and Cornelius's threats. But the most important preparation was Hannah herself. "They're going to try to break you," Whitfield said during one of their practice sessions. "Blackwood's lawyers will say you're lying. They'll say you're hysterical. They'll say you made up the abuse to justify your adultery." "Adultery?" Hannah's voice rose. "I was running for my life." "I know that. You know that. But they'll twist every fact to make you look like the villain." Whitfield's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to be prepared for every attack they'll throw at you. You need to stay calm, speak clearly, and tell the truth no matter what they say." "How can I stay calm when Cornelius is sitting there watching me?" "You don't look at him. You look at the judge. You look at me. You look at Samuel." Whitfield paused. "And you remember why you're doing this. For Grace. For your freedom. For every woman who's ever been too afraid to speak." The practice sessions were brutal. Whitfield played the role of Cornelius's lawyer, asking questions designed to humiliate and confuse. He made Hannah repeat her story over and over, looking for inconsistencies, pushing her to clarify details she'd rather forget. Samuel sat through every session, his face growing darker with each revelation. Hannah had told him the broad strokes of her marriage, but hearing the specifics, hearing her describe the beatings in clinical detail, seemed to affect him in ways she hadn't anticipated. "We should stop for today," she said, after one particularly difficult session, watching Samuel pace the room like a caged animal. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like you want to kill someone." Samuel stopped pacing. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw so tight she could see the muscles jumping. "I do want to kill someone. I want to kill him. I want to ride to Leadville right now and put a bullet between his eyes." That would solve nothing. It would solve plenty. It would mean he could never hurt you again. And you'd hang for murder, and Grace would grow up without a father. Hannah crossed the room and took his hands, gently uncurling his fingers. "Samuel, I need you here. I need you alive. Promise me you won't do anything stupid." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes full of pain and rage and something softer underneath. "I promise. But Hannah, if we lose this case, if that judge orders you back to him, then we'll figure something out. We'll run, we'll hide, we'll do whatever we have to do." She squeezed his hands. "But we won't give up, not yet, not while there's still a chance." Samuel pulled her close, and Hannah let herself lean into him, drawing strength from his warmth. She was getting better at this, she realized. Better at accepting comfort. Better at trusting that his arms were safe. "When did you get so brave?" he murmured against her hair. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified." That's what bravery is, being terrified and doing it anyway. The night before they were to leave for Denver, Hannah couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to Samuel's steady breathing beside her, watching the shadows move across the ceiling, trying not to think about what was coming. 3 years. She had endured 3 years of Cornelius's abuse. 3 years of walking on eggshells, of apologizing for breathing, of praying for death, just so the pain would stop. And now, She was supposed to stand in a courtroom and relive all of it, while the man who had broken her sat watching with that smile on his face. She wasn't sure she could do it. Hannah. Samuel's voice was soft in the darkness. I can hear you thinking. I'm sorry, did I wake you? I wasn't sleeping either. He shifted, and she felt his hand find hers under the blankets. Talk to me. I'm scared, she admitted. I know I said I could do this, but now that it's here, I'm not sure anymore. What if I freeze up there? What if I can't get the words out? What if they believe him instead of me? Then we deal with that when it happens. But Hannah, I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen you prepare, seen you practice, seen you face things that would break most people. You're stronger than you know. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't a feeling, it's a choice. Samuel's thumb traced circles on her palm. Every day you choose to keep going. Every day you choose to fight instead of giving up. That's strength, Hannah. That's the strongest thing there is. She turned to face him in the darkness, barely able to make out the shape of his features. What if I lose? You won't. But what if I do? What happens to us to Grace? Samuel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and fierce. Then we run. I've got friends in Montana, people who don't ask questions. We disappear. Change our names, start over somewhere. Blackwood will never find us. You'd give up everything for us, your home, your friends, your whole life. I'd give up a hell of a lot more than that. He pulled her closer, and she felt his lips brush her forehead. You and Grace are my life now. Everything else is just geography. Hannah felt tears pricking at her eyes. She had spent so long believing she was worthless, believing she deserved the pain Cornelius inflicted. And here was this man, this rough-handed cowboy, who had stumbled into her life by accident, telling her she was worth everything. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Win tomorrow. That's all the thanks I need. The journey to Denver took 2 days by wagon. Hannah held Grace close the entire time, watching the winter landscape roll past, trying to prepare herself for what was coming. Whitfield rode alongside them, reviewing legal strategies and precedents, but his words barely registered. All Hannah could think about was Cornelius, his face, his voice, his hands. The territorial courthouse was an imposing stone building that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. Hannah climbed the steps with Grace in her arms, Samuel on one side, and Whitfield on the other, and felt like she was walking to her own execution. The courtroom was already full when they entered. Local people had come to watch, drawn by the scandal of a wealthy mine owner fighting for his runaway wife. Hannah saw curious faces, some sympathetic, some judgmental, all of them strangers. And there at the front of the room sat Cornelius. He looked exactly the way he always looked. Expensive suit, perfectly groomed hair, the picture of refined gentility. He smiled when he saw her, and Hannah's stomach turned to ice. Don't look at him, Samuel whispered. Look at me. She turned to her husband, focusing on his face, on the steady warmth in his eyes. He gave her a small nod of encouragement, and she felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. She could do this. She had to do this. Judge Marcus Harrington took his seat at the bench, a severe-looking man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He reviewed the papers before him with methodical precision. This court is now in session. We are here to determine the validity of the marriage between Hannah Prescott and Samuel Thornton, and to address Mr. Cornelius Blackwood's petition for the return of his wife and child. Harrington looked up. Mr. Whitfield, I understand you represent the respondents. Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Crawford represents the petitioner. Cornelius's lawyer, a silver-tongued man with cold eyes, rose smoothly. I do, Your Honor. Very well. Mr. Crawford, you may present your case. What followed was 2 hours of carefully constructed lies. Crawford painted Cornelius as a devoted husband, a successful businessman, a man who had been devastated when his unstable wife kidnapped their infant daughter and fled into the wilderness. He produced character witnesses who swore that Cornelius was kind and gentle, that they had never seen him raise his hand to anyone. Hannah listened with her nails digging into her palms, fighting the urge to scream. These people knew. They had to know. How could they sit there and lie with such conviction? But then she remembered. Cornelius was charming. Cornelius was wealthy. Cornelius was exactly the kind of man people wanted to believe in. Why would anyone choose to see the monster underneath when the facade was so appealing? "And now, Your Honor," Crawford concluded, "I would like to call Mr. Cornelius Blackwood to the stand." Cornelius rose with graceful confidence and took his place in the witness chair. He answered questions smoothly, his voice warm with feigned concern. Yes, he loved his wife deeply. Yes, he had searched for her desperately when she disappeared. Yes, he only wanted what was best for her and their daughter. "Can you explain why Mrs. Blackwood might have fled?" Crawford asked. Cornelius sighed, the picture of wounded bewilderment. "I've asked myself that question every day since she left. Hannah has always been delicate. After the baby was born, she became increasingly irrational. She would forget things, imagine threats that didn't exist. I tried to get her help, but she refused." "So you believe she was suffering from some form of mental instability?" "I believe she was ill and needed care. Care that I was prepared to provide until she was taken advantage of by an opportunistic stranger." Hannah felt Samuel tense beside her. She put her hand on his arm, a silent warning. "Your witness, Mr. Whitfield," Crawford said with a smug smile. Whitfield rose slowly. "Mr. Blackwood, you say your wife was mentally unstable. Do you have any medical documentation to support this claim?" Cornelius's smile faltered slightly. "I wasn't able to get her to a doctor. As I said, she refused treatment. So there's no professional diagnosis of any kind?" "No, but anyone who knew her could see. I'm asking about professional medical evidence, Mr. Blackwood, not opinions." Whitfield picked up a folder from his table. "I have here a medical report from Dr. Ezekiel Hawkins of Silver Creek, Colorado. Dr. Hawkins examined Mrs. Thornton when she arrived in his town. Would you like me to read his findings?" Cornelius's expression went carefully blank. "That won't be necessary." "I think it is." Whitfield opened the folder. Dr. Hawkins documented healing fractures in Mrs. Thornton's left wrist and right ribs. He documented extensive bruising on her face, arms, and torso. He documented scarring consistent with repeated trauma over an extended period. Whitfield looked up. "Mr. Blackwood, can you explain how your wife came to have these injuries?" She was always clumsy. She fell frequently. She fell frequently enough to break bones to leave scars. Hannah was prone to accidents." "Accidents." Whitfield's voice was flat. "Is that what you call it when you beat your wife, Mr. Blackwood? An accident?" "Objection." Crawford was on his feet. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "I'm questioning his credibility, Your Honor. The medical evidence directly contradicts his testimony." Judge Harrington's face was unreadable. "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Blackwood." Cornelius's mask was slipping. Hannah could see the anger building behind his eyes, the rage he'd always been so careful to hide in public. "I never laid a hand on my wife." "Then how do you explain the injuries documented by a trained physician?" "I can't explain them. Perhaps she injured herself during her flight. Perhaps your so-called physician is lying to protect his friend." Dr. Hawkins is a decorated Army surgeon with 30 years of medical experience. Are you suggesting he fabricated evidence? I'm suggesting that people can be bought. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harrington banged his gavel. "Order. Mr. Blackwood, be very careful about making accusations you cannot support." Whitfield pressed on. "Mr. Blackwood, when your wife fled your home, she had a 2-week-old infant. She had no money, no supplies, no means of transportation. She walked through a blizzard for 6 days until she collapsed from exhaustion. Does that sound like the behavior of a woman who was simply delicate? Cornelius's jaw tightened. She wasn't thinking clearly. Or perhaps she was thinking very clearly. Perhaps she understood that walking into a blizzard with her baby was preferable to staying in your home. That's absurd. Is it? Whitfield turned to face the gallery. What kind of man inspires such terror in his wife that she would rather risk death in a snowstorm than remain under his roof? Objection. Counsel is testifying. Withdrawn. Whitfield returned to his table. No further questions. Cornelius stepped down from the witness stand, his charming facade cracked, but not quite broken. He shot Hannah a look as he passed a look that promised retribution, and she felt the old fear claw at her chest. Then, it was her turn. The defense calls Hannah Thornton to the stand. Hannah's legs felt like water as she rose. Samuel squeezed her hand, and she held on to that warmth as she walked to the witness chair. She took the oath with a voice that barely trembled, then sat down and faced the room. All those eyes, all those people, and Cornelius watching her with that cold, expectant smile. She couldn't do this. She couldn't, Mrs. Thornton. Whitfield's voice was gentle. Can you tell the court about your marriage to Cornelius Blackwood? Hannah took a breath. She looked at Samuel sitting straight and steady in the gallery, his eyes full of faith in her. And she began to speak. She told them everything. The wedding night, the first beating, the escalating violence, the isolation, the humiliation, the constant fear. She described broken bones and split lips and nights spent curled on the floor praying for it to end. She described the prison that was her beautiful home, the monster that was her handsome husband, the slow death of everything she had once believed was possible. Her voice shook sometimes. Tears ran down her face. But she kept going, kept speaking, kept telling the truth that Cornelius had worked so hard to bury. And when you discovered you were pregnant, Whitfield prompted. I knew I had to leave. I couldn't let my daughter grow up watching what he did to me. I couldn't let her learn that love means fear. So you ran. I ran. And he caught me, twice. Hannah's voice hardened. The third time I made it to Silver Creek, and Samuel found me. Mr. Thornton found you. He heard Grace crying in the blizzard. He stopped to help. Hannah looked at Samuel across the courtroom. Anyone else would have ridden past, but he stopped. He saved our lives. And then he married you. He married me to protect me, to give me legal standing against Cornelius. Hannah turned to face the judge directly. Your Honor, I know how this looks. I know we've only known each other a short time. But Samuel has shown me more kindness in 2 months than Cornelius showed me in 3 years. He treats me like a person, not a possession. He asks what I want instead of telling me what to do. Mrs. Thornton, Judge Harrington interrupted. Are you saying your marriage to Mr. Thornton is legitimate? That it's not simply a legal strategy to avoid your first husband? Hannah considered the question carefully. It started as protection. I won't lie about that, but it's become something more. Samuel is my husband in every way that matters, and he's a better father to Grace than Cornelius ever would have been. Crawford rose for cross-examination, his smile predatory. Mrs. Thornton, you've made some very serious accusations today, but I notice you have no witnesses to this alleged abuse. No one who saw Mr. Blackwood strike you. He was careful. He only hit me when we were alone. How convenient. So we only have your word for these claims. You have my scars. You have my broken bones. You have the fact that I walked through a blizzard with a newborn baby rather than stay in his house. Crawford waved his hand dismissively. You've admitted that your marriage to Mr. Thornton was a strategic decision. How do we know this entire story isn't a strategy, a fabrication designed to win sympathy? Why would I lie about something like this? To escape your obligations. To justify your adultery. To keep your paramour from facing consequences. Samuel is not my paramour. He's my husband. And I'm not lying." "So you say." Crawford leaned closer. "Mrs. Thornton, isn't it true that you left your husband simply because you found a more attractive option, that you invented these abuse allegations to make yourself look like a victim?" "No." "Isn't it true that you seduced Mr. Thornton into marriage by playing the helpless damsel?" "No." "Isn't it true that you're nothing but a faithless wife who abandoned her legal husband for a rough cowboy who caught your eye?" "No." Hannah's voice rose. "That is not what happened. I ran because Cornelius was going to kill me. Sooner or later, he was going to go too far, and I was going to die. And my daughter was going to grow up watching it happen." The courtroom was silent. Hannah was breathing hard, her hands shaking, but she didn't back down. She met Crawford's eyes steadily. "I'm not a faithless wife. I'm a survivor. And if telling the truth about what Cornelius did to me makes me look bad in your eyes, then your eyes are the problem, not me." Crawford seemed taken aback by her fierceness. He retreated to his table. No further questions. Judge Harrington called a recess, and Hannah nearly collapsed as she stepped down from the stand. Samuel was at her side instantly, his arm around her shoulders supporting her weight. "You did it," he murmured. "You were incredible." "Did it matter?" Hannah's voice was hollow. "Will anyone believe me?" "They believed you. I could see it in their faces." "And the judge—" Samuel hesitated. "Harrington's hard to read, but you gave him the truth. That's all you could do." The recess stretched into an hour, then two. Hannah sat in a small anteroom with Samuel and Grace, waiting for the judge to make his decision. Every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, the bailiff appeared. "Court is reconvening." They filed back into the courtroom, taking their seats as Judge Harrington returned to the bench. His face was as unreadable as ever. "I have reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today," he began. "This case presents unusual challenges. We have two marriages involving the same woman, conflicting claims about abuse and questions of jurisdiction that cross territorial lines." Hannah's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear. "However," Harrington continued, "certain facts are clear. Medical evidence supports Mrs. Thornton's claims of physical abuse. Her flight from her first husband, undertaken under extremely dangerous conditions with an infant child, suggests genuine fear rather than mere marital discord. And the marriage to Mr. Thornton, while unconventional in its timing, appears to have been entered into freely and with legitimate intent." Cornelius was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood." Harrington's voice was cold. "I'm not finished." Cornelius sat, his face purple with rage. "It is the ruling of this court that the marriage between Hannah Thornton and Samuel Thornton is valid and legally binding. Mr. Blackwood's petition for return of his wife and child is denied." The courtroom erupted. Hannah couldn't breathe. Samuel was gripping her hand so tight it hurt, but she didn't care. They had won. Against all odds, against all of Cornelius's money and power and lies, they had won. Furthermore, Harrington continued, raising his voice above the commotion, "this court finds sufficient evidence to warrant an investigation into Mr. Blackwood's conduct. I am referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for review." Cornelius's face went white. "You can't do that." "I can, and I have." Harrington's gaze was withering. "Mr. Blackwood, I have been a judge for 20 years. I have seen many abusers sit where you're sitting, wearing their fine suits and their charming smiles, lying through their teeth about the women they've broken. I know what you are, and I will not allow my court to be used as an instrument of your control." He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned." The chaos that followed was a blur. Whitfield was shaking Samuel's hand. Martha was crying with joy. Sheriff Mitchell was congratulating everyone within reach. And Hannah just stood there holding Grace, trying to process what had just happened. She was free, legally, officially free. Samuel pulled her into his arms. Grace squished happily between them. "We did it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Hannah, we actually did it." I can't believe it. Her voice was muffled against his chest. I keep waiting to wake up. You're not dreaming. This is real. He pulled back to look at her face. You're free, Hannah. He can't touch you anymore. But even as she let herself feel the joy of the moment, Hannah's eyes found Cornelius across the courtroom. He was surrounded by his lawyers, his face a mask of controlled fury. But when their eyes met, she saw something that made her blood run cold. He wasn't finished. Despite the ruling, despite the investigation, despite everything, Cornelius Blackwood was not finished. His lips moved, shaping words only she could see. This isn't over. Hannah looked away, pressing closer to Samuel, trying to quiet the fear that whispered in her heart. They had won the battle. But the war, she knew, was far from over. The journey back to Silver Creek should have felt like a triumph. They had won. The judge had ruled in their favor. Cornelius's petition had been denied. By every measure that mattered, Hannah was free. But she couldn't shake the memory of his eyes across that courtroom. The cold promise in them. The absolute certainty that he wasn't finished. You're quiet, Samuel said on the second day of travel, guiding the wagon through a narrow mountain pass. Been quiet since we left Denver. I'm thinking about what he said, what he mouthed to you. Hannah looked at him sharply. You saw that. I saw his face, saw yours too. Samuel's jaw tightened. He's not going to accept this, is he? Cornelius has never lost anything in his life. Not a business deal, not a card game, not a woman. Hannah pulled her coat tighter against the cold. He won't accept losing me. Then we'll be ready for him. How? He has money. He has men. He has nothing left to lose now that his reputation is being investigated. Hannah's voice cracked. Samuel, the courtroom was one thing. But if he comes for us directly, then I'll stop him. You can't watch me every second of every day. You can't protect me from everything. Watch me try. They arrived in Silver Creek to a hero's welcome. Word of the trial had spread, and the townspeople lined the main street to cheer their return. Hannah smiled and waved, but inside she felt hollow. These good people had no idea what might be coming. No idea what Cornelius was capable of when pushed to his limits. The first week passed without incident, then the second. Hannah began teaching again. Her small classroom now swelled to 15 students whose parents had heard about the brave woman who had stood up to a powerful man. Samuel went back to work at the livery, but he never stayed long. He checked on her constantly, appeared at odd hours, kept his rifle close. You're exhausting yourself, Hannah told him one evening as he dozed in the chair by the fire, dark circles under his eyes. You can't keep this up forever. I can keep it up as long as I need to. Samuel. She knelt beside him, taking his calloused hands in hers. We won. The judge ruled in our favor. Maybe Cornelius has accepted it. Maybe he's moved on. Do you believe that? Hannah hesitated. I want to believe it. That's not the same thing. She looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, and felt the familiar twist of fear in her chest. No, it's not. Samuel pulled her close, and she let herself lean into his warmth. These moments had become precious to her. The quiet intimacy of being held without expectation, without fear. Samuel asked nothing of her that she wasn't ready to give, and that patience had done something she hadn't thought possible. It had made her fall in love with him. She hadn't told him yet. The words stuck in her throat every time she tried, blocked by years of having her feelings used against her. Cornelius had demanded declarations of love and punished her when they weren't convincing enough. The very act of saying those words felt dangerous, like tempting fate. But she felt them. God help her, she felt them. Samuel, she whispered against his chest. There's something I need to tell you. What is it? A knock at the door cut her off. Sharp. Urgent. Samuel was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Stay here. He moved to the door and opened it to reveal Sheriff Mitchell, his face grim. "We've got a problem," Mitchell said without preamble. "Ryder came in 20 minutes ago. Said there's a group of men camped about 5 miles east of town. 8 of them well-armed, keeping to themselves." Hannah's blood went cold. "Blackwood?" Samuel asked. "Can't confirm, but who else would it be?" Strangers said they looked like hired guns, not miners or trappers. Samuel turned to Hannah. "Take Grace to the Hawkins house. Stay there until I come for you." "Samuel, no. I'm not leaving you." "Hannah, please. If this is what we think it is, I need to know you're safe." "And what about you? What about your safety?" "I'll be fine. Mitchell and I will handle this." Hannah grabbed his arm. "You can't just ride out there and confront 8 armed men. That's suicide." "I ain't planning to confront anyone. Just see what we're dealing with." Samuel cupped her face in his hands. "Trust me, please." She wanted to argue, wanted to scream that she couldn't lose him. Not now. Not when she'd finally found something worth living for. But the determination in his eyes told her arguing was useless. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Promise you'll come back." "I promise." He kissed her forehead, grabbed his coat, and was gone. The hours that followed were the longest of Hannah's life. She sat in the Hawkins parlor with Grace in her arms, jumping at every sound, straining to hear horses or gunshots or anything that would tell her what was happening. Martha sat with her quiet and solid, offering comfort, without false assurance. Dr. Hawkins paced by the window, his old army revolver within reach. "He'll be all right," Martha said for the 100th time. "Samuel's smart. He won't take unnecessary risks. You don't know Cornelius. You don't know what he'll do. I know what your husband is capable of. I watched him carry you through a blizzard, half frozen himself, refusing to stop until he got you to safety. A man like that doesn't die easy." Hannah wanted to believe her, but she'd seen too much of the world's cruelty to trust in happy endings. The sound of hoofbeats made her heart stop. She was at the window before Martha could move, straining to see through the darkness. Samuel rode into view alone, his face hard in the lamplight. Hannah was out the door before anyone could stop her. "What happened? Are you all right? What did you find?" Samuel dismounted and pulled her into his arms. She could feel him trembling, feel the tension radiating from every muscle. "It's him," Samuel said quietly. "Blackwood. He's out there with 7 hired guns, and they're not camping for pleasure. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For me to leave you unprotected, for a chance to take you back." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "Mitchell sent riders to the neighboring towns for help, but it'll take at least a day for anyone to get here. Until then, we're on our own." "What do we do?" "We fort up, the whole town. Everyone who can handle a gun posts up at key positions. We make it clear that if Blackwood wants a fight, he'll get one." "Samuel, these are miners and shopkeepers, not soldiers. They can't stand against professional gunmen." "They won't have to. Men like Blackwood don't want a war. They want easy prey." Samuel pulled back to look at her face. "We show him Silver Creek isn't easy prey, and maybe he backs off. And if he doesn't—" Samuel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The town transformed overnight. Sheriff Mitchell organized the men into patrol groups, stationing them at every entrance to Silver Creek. Windows were barricaded. Women and children gathered in the church, the most defensible building in town. Everyone who could hold a rifle was given one. Hannah refused to hide. "You should be at the church with Grace," Samuel argued. If something happens, I want to be with you." Her voice was fierce. "I spent 3 years hiding from Cornelius, cowering in corners, praying someone would save me. I'm done hiding. If he wants me, he can come and face me himself." "Hannah?" "No. I mean it, Samuel. This is my fight. Mine. You gave me the strength to stand up in that courtroom and tell the truth. Now let me stand beside you here." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a mixture of fear and pride, and something deeper. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known," he said quietly. "I'm terrified." "I know. So am I." They positioned themselves at Widow Crawford's boarding house, which had a clear view of the main street. Grace was safe at the church, with Martha surrounded by armed townswomen who had made it clear that anyone threatening their children would die trying. The night stretched on cold and silent. Hannah sat by the window with Samuel's spare rifle across her knees, watching the darkness for movement. "Hannah," Samuel said from his position by the door, "there's something I need to say. In case things go bad. Don't talk like that." "I have to." He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. "I love you. I've loved you since the moment you opened your eyes in Doc Hawkins' office and asked about your baby before you asked about yourself. I know you're not ready to hear it. I know you might never be ready, but I need you to know." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel, you don't have to say it back. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that whatever happens tonight, the time I've had with you and Grace has been the best time of my life. You made me believe I could be something more than just a drifter. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to stay." Hannah reached out and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble against her palm. "I do love you," she whispered. "I've been too scared to say it, too scared to admit it even to myself. But I love you, Samuel. I love you so much, it terrifies me." Samuel's breath caught. "You mean that?" "I mean it. Whatever happens tonight, whatever Cornelius does, I need you to know that you're the first man who ever made me feel safe. The first man who ever treated me like I was worth something. If I die tonight, you're not going to die. If I die tonight," she repeated firmly, "I want to die knowing I told you the truth. I love you, Samuel Thornton. I love you, and I'm grateful for every minute we've had together." Samuel pulled her into his arms, and for one perfect moment the danger outside ceased to exist. There was only this. Only them. Only the miracle of finding each other in a world that had given them both so many reasons to stop believing in miracles. Then gunshots shattered the silence. Samuel was at the window instantly. "They're coming. East side of town." Hannah grabbed her rifle and moved to the opposite window. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. She had spent years being afraid. Tonight, she would channel that fear into something else. More gunshots, shouting, the sounds of chaos from the edge of town. "It's a distraction," Samuel said suddenly. "They're drawing our attention east while..." The boarding house door exploded inward. Cornelius stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his hired guns. His expensive coat was dusty, his perfect hair disheveled, but his eyes burned with the cold fire Hannah remembered from 1,000 nightmares. "Hello, darling," he said. "Did you miss me?" Samuel raised his rifle, but one of Cornelius's men was faster. A shot rang out, and Samuel staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. "Samuel!" Hannah screamed. "I wouldn't move if I were you." Cornelius stepped into the room, his voice pleasant as if they were discussing the weather. "One more shot, and your cowboy dies. Is that what you want?" Hannah froze her rifle, still raised her eyes, darting between Samuel and Cornelius. Samuel was on his knees now, blood seeping between his fingers, but he was alive. Still alive. "What do you want?" she demanded. "What I've always wanted. My wife, my daughter, my property returned to me." "I'm not your property. I was never your property." "The law says otherwise." "The law says I'm married to Samuel. The law says your petition was denied." "Laws can be changed. Judges can be bought. Witnesses can disappear." Cornelius moved closer, and Hannah forced herself not to back away. "But I didn't come here to argue legalities. I came here to take back what's mine. Grace isn't here. She's safe. You'll never find her. Oh, I know where she is. My men are retrieving her from the church as we speak." Cornelius smiled at the horror on Hannah's face. "Did you think your little frontier militia could stop professionals?" They're farmers, Hannah. Shopkeepers. They're not equipped for a real fight. You're a monster. I'm a man who doesn't accept defeat. Cornelius reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Now drop the rifle and come with me quietly, or I'll have my man put another bullet in your precious cowboy, this time in his head. Hannah looked at Samuel. He was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear and fierce. Don't, he said through gritted teeth. Don't go with him. Whatever happens to me, don't. Shut up. Cornelius's man kicked Samuel in his wounded shoulder, and Samuel crumpled with a cry of pain. Something inside Hannah snapped. Years of fear of submission, of making herself small, burned away in a single instant of white-hot rage. She looked at Cornelius, at his smug face and cold eyes, and she felt nothing but contempt. You think you've won, she said quietly. I have won. No. Hannah's voice was steel. You've lost everything. You just don't know it yet. She moved faster than Cornelius expected, faster than she'd known she could move. Her knee came up hard between his legs, and he doubled over with a gasp of shock. His grip on her arm loosened, and she tore free, bringing her rifle up in one smooth motion. The gun went off inches from the hired man's face. He screamed and staggered backward, blood streaming from where the bullet had grazed his temple. Samuel tackled the second man from behind wounded shoulder, and all driving him to the ground with a fury that belied his injury. They grappled on the floor, fighting for control of the man's pistol. Cornelius was recovering, reaching for the gun at his hip. Hannah pointed her rifle at his chest. Don't, she said. He froze, his hand hovering over the weapon. For the first time since she'd known him, Hannah saw something like fear in his eyes. You won't shoot me, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. You're not capable of it. You don't know what I'm capable of. You never did. Hannah's hands were rock steady. You spent 3 years trying to break me, Cornelius. You failed. I walked through a blizzard with a baby in my arms rather than stay with you. I stood up in a courtroom and told the world what you are. And now I'm standing here with a rifle pointed at your heart, and I will pull this trigger if you give me one more reason. Behind her, Samuel had subdued the second man. He struggled to his feet, one arm hanging useless, his face white with pain. Hannah, he said softly, you don't have to do this. Let the law handle him. The law? Hannah laughed bitterly. The law protected him for years. The law let him beat me and call it discipline. The law would have given me back to him if not for a judge with a conscience. Then do it for yourself. For grace. Don't become a killer because of him. Hannah's finger tightened on the trigger. She could see Cornelius's pulse jumping in his throat, could smell his fear. It would be so easy. One squeeze and it would all be over. No more running, no more hiding, no more nightmares. But Samuel was right. If she killed Cornelius in cold blood, she would become something she didn't want to be. She would let him win in a different way. Get on your knees, she ordered. Cornelius didn't move. I said get on your knees. Hannah's voice rose to a shout. Now. Slowly, awkwardly, Cornelius sank to his knees. His face was a mask of humiliation and rage. You're going to leave, Hannah said. You're going to take your men and ride out of Silver Creek tonight, and you're never coming back. And if I refuse, then I'll shoot you in the leg and let the sheriff deal with you. Either way, you lose. You can't keep me away forever. I'll find another way. No, you won't. Hannah stepped closer, lowering the rifle until it was inches from his face. Because if you come near me or my daughter or my husband ever again, I won't hesitate. I won't warn you. I'll just pull the trigger and deal with the consequences. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. You taught me what it means to be afraid, Cornelius. You taught me what it means to have no hope, no options, no escape. But you also taught me something else. You taught me that survival requires sacrifice. And I will sacrifice anything, including my soul, to protect my family from you. Cornelius stared at her, and for the first time she saw him truly understand. She wasn't the broken woman he'd terrorized for years. She had become something else, something harder, something dangerous. "You've changed," he said. "Yes, and you made me this way." Hannah straightened. "Now get out, before I change my mind." The commotion outside was dying down. Sheriff Mitchell's voice could be heard shouting orders, and the gunfire had stopped. Whatever Cornelius's men had attempted, it had failed. Cornelius rose slowly to his feet. His expensive suit was ruined, his perfect facade shattered. He looked at Hannah one last time, and she saw something she'd never seen before. Defeat. "This isn't over," he said, but the words were hollow. "Yes, it is. Goodbye, Cornelius." He turned and walked out of the boarding house, his remaining man limping behind him. Hannah watched them go, her rifle still raised until they disappeared into the darkness. Then her legs gave out. Samuel caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her against him with his good arm. They sank down together, holding each other, both of them shaking with adrenaline and relief. "You did it," Samuel said, his voice raw. "Hannah, you faced him down. You won." "We won." Hannah was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Is it over? Is it really over?" "I think so. I think you finally broke him. I need to find Grace. I need to make sure she's safe." "She's safe. Listen." Hannah listened. The chaos had faded, replaced by cheering voices. The townspeople had held. Cornelius's men had been driven back. Martha's voice rang out. "Hannah, Samuel, are you all right?" "In here," Samuel called. "We're all right." Martha appeared in the doorway. Grace in her arms, the baby crying but unharmed. Behind her came Sheriff Mitchell, Dr. Hawkins, and what seemed like half the town. Hannah reached for her daughter, pulling Grace against her chest, feeling the baby's warmth and weight and life. She was here. They were all here. They had survived. "Blackwood's men are retreating," Mitchell reported. "We captured 3 of them. The rest are riding east like the devil himself is chasing them." "And Cornelius?" "Saw him riding with them. Whatever you said to him, it worked." Hannah looked at Samuel, at his pale face and bloodied shoulder, and felt a surge of love so strong it nearly knocked her over. "We need to get you to the doctor," she said. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "Just a scratch." Dr. Hawkins pushed through the crowd. "That's not a scratch, you stubborn fool. That's a bullet wound that needs treatment immediately." Samuel tried to protest, but Hawkins was already examining the injury, his experienced hands gentle but firm. Martha took Grace from Hannah's arms, murmuring comfort to the crying baby. And Hannah just stood there, surrounded by people who had risked their lives to protect her family, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Home. She was finally home. Samuel's wound healed slowly, leaving a scar that would mark him for the rest of his days. Hannah changed his bandages every morning and every night, her hands gentle but steady, no longer trembling the way they once had. "You're getting good at this," Samuel said one evening, watching her work by lamplight. "I've had practice." "On yourself, you mean?" Hannah's hands paused for just a moment. "Yes, on myself." Samuel caught her wrist, gently waiting until she met his eyes. "Those days are over. You know that, right?" "I know." She resumed wrapping the bandage. "But sometimes I forget. Sometimes I wake up in the night and think I'm back there in that house waiting for the door to open. And then I feel you beside me. I hear you breathing, and I remember where I am." She tied off the bandage and sat back. "You saved me, Samuel, not just from the blizzard, from everything." "You saved yourself. I just helped." Hannah smiled, and it reached her eyes the way it rarely had in those early days. "We saved each other then." The weeks that followed were the most peaceful Hannah had ever known. Word came from Denver that Cornelius had been formally charged with fraud related to his mining operations. The investigation triggered by Judge Harrington had uncovered years of financial manipulation, bribery, and theft. His empire was crumbling. His reputation destroyed, his fortune seized by creditors and lawyers. "He won't be bothering anyone for a long time," Sheriff Mitchell reported. "Man's got bigger problems than a runaway wife now." Hannah received the news with quiet satisfaction. She had imagined this moment so many times during her years of captivity, dreamed of Cornelius being brought low, forced to face consequences for his cruelty. But now that it was happening, she felt only relief. Not joy, not triumph, just relief that the monster who had haunted her nightmares was finally facing justice. "How do you feel?" Samuel asked that night, watching her rock Grace by the fire. "Free." The word came easily now, no longer foreign on her tongue. "I feel free." Spring arrived, slowly melting the snow that had covered Silver Creek for months. With the thaw came new beginnings. Hannah's school had grown to 20 students, their parents contributing what they could to pay for her services. She had a proper classroom now, a small building the townspeople had constructed together with real desks and a chalkboard and shelves lined with books. "Teacher," Grace had started calling her, mimicking the other children. "Mama Teacher." The name made Hannah laugh every time she heard it. Samuel had taken over the livery stable from old Mr. Patterson, who had decided to retire to California, where his daughter lived. The work was steady, the income reliable, and for the first time in his life, Samuel had roots, real roots, a home, a family, a reason to stay. "Never thought I'd be a stableman," he said one evening, coming home smelling of horses and hay. "Always figured I'd drift until I died." "Do you miss it?" The drifting. Samuel considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. There's a freedom in having no ties, no obligations, nobody depending on you." He looked at Grace toddling across the floor with her determined little steps. "But then I look at her, at you, and I can't imagine wanting anything else." Hannah crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, not caring about the horse smell or the dust on his clothes. "I love you," she said. She said it often now. The words had stopped feeling dangerous, stopped catching in her throat like broken glass. Samuel had never used them against her, never demanded them as proof of loyalty or weaponized them for control. He simply accepted them and gave them back, a gift freely exchanged. "I love you too," he murmured against her hair. "More every day." Grace tugged at his trouser leg, demanding to be picked up. Samuel swung her into his arms with practiced ease, and Hannah watched them together, her heart so full it ached. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not fear, not walking on eggshells, not praying for escape, just warmth and safety and belonging. The nightmares came less frequently now. When they did come, Samuel was always there, pulling her close, murmuring comfort until the terror faded. He never complained about the interrupted sleep, never showed frustration at her lingering trauma. He simply held her and waited patient, as he had been from the very beginning. "Will it ever stop?" Hannah asked one night, after a particularly bad dream. "The fear, the memories." "I don't know. Maybe not completely." Samuel stroked her hair in the darkness. "But it'll get easier. It already has." "How do you know?" "Because I watch you. I see you laugh with your students. I see you play with Grace without that shadow in your eyes. I see you argue with me when I'm being stubborn instead of just agreeing to keep the peace." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're healing, Hannah. Every day a little more." She curled closer to him, feeling his heartbeat steady against her cheek. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you know." "Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out." Summer brought heat and dust and news from the outside world. A letter arrived from Boston from a cousin Hannah had barely known, informing her that her father had died. The letter was brief, formal, offering condolences without warmth. Hannah read it twice, then set it aside. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked. "I don't know how to feel." She stared out the window at the mountains in the distance. "He sold me to Cornelius. He saw the signs and chose to ignore them because the match was advantageous. He let me walk into that marriage knowing what kind of man he was giving me to. That doesn't mean you can't grieve. Does it make me a bad person that I don't want to? That I feel nothing except relief that I'll never have to see him again? It makes you human." Samuel came to stand beside her. "He failed you, Hannah, in the worst possible way. You're allowed to feel however you feel about that. I keep thinking about what might have been. If he'd protected me instead of profiting from me. If he'd listened when I tried to tell him what Cornelius was really like." Hannah's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I could have had a real father. Instead, I had a businessman who saw me as an asset to be traded. You're not an asset. You never were." "I know that now." She turned to face him. "But it took you to teach me. It took finding someone who saw me as a person to understand what I'd been missing all along." Samuel pulled her into his arms, and she let the tears come. Not tears of grief exactly, tears of release, of finally letting go of the fantasy that her father might someday have loved her the way she needed to be loved. He hadn't. He couldn't. And she was done waiting for something that would never come. "You have a family now," Samuel said quietly. "A real one. People who love you because of who you are, not what you can do for them." "I know." Hannah wiped her eyes. "And I'm grateful. Every single day, I'm grateful." Fall came again, painting the mountains in gold and crimson. A year had passed since Samuel had heard a baby crying in a blizzard and made the choice that changed everything. A year of healing, a year of growing, a year of building something neither of them had dared to hope for. Hannah stood in her classroom on the anniversary of that day, watching her students work on their arithmetic. Grace sat in the corner with a picture book babbling to herself in the mysterious language of toddlers. Through the window, she could see Samuel crossing the street from the livery, his familiar walk stirring warmth in her chest. He caught her eye and smiled. She smiled back. "Mrs. Thornton." One of her students, a serious boy named Thomas, raised his hand. "Is it true that Mr. Thornton saved you and Grace from a blizzard?" Hannah considered the question. "He found us in the storm. Yes. We were lost and cold and scared. He could have ridden past, but he didn't." "Why not?" "Because he heard Grace crying, and he couldn't ignore a baby in trouble. My pa says Mr. Thornton is a hero." Hannah smiled. "Your pa is right. Are you going to tell us the story? Maybe someday, when you're older." She returned her attention to the lesson. "Now who can tell me what 7 times 8 equals?" That evening the Thornton family gathered for dinner in their small house at the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. They had built it together over the summer, Samuel doing the heavy work, while Hannah planned and organized and made sure Grace didn't toddle into the construction zone. "Do you remember what day it is?" Hannah asked as they sat down to eat. "Tuesday." "It's been a year, Samuel. A year since you found us." Samuel paused his fork halfway to his mouth. "Has it really?" 365 days. I've been counting." "Why?" "Because I wanted to mark it. To remember." Hannah reached across the table and took his hand. "A year ago I was dying in the snow. I had given up hope. I was ready to let go, and the only thing keeping me fighting was Grace." "Hannah." "Let me finish." She squeezed his fingers. "A year ago I couldn't imagine feeling safe again. I couldn't imagine trusting a man again. I couldn't imagine waking up without fear or going to sleep without dreading the morning. And now I have all of that. Because of you." Her eyes shone with tears, but she was smiling. "You gave me my life back, Samuel. You gave Grace a father. You gave us a home and a family and a future." Samuel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You gave me just as much. More, maybe. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. I didn't know what I was missing because I'd never had it. And now I can't imagine life without you. Either of you." He looked at Grace, who was enthusiastically smearing mashed potatoes across her face. "She's going to be a handful when she's older." Hannah laughed. "She's already a handful, but she's our handful." "Yes." Samuel's voice was thick with emotion. "She is." After dinner, after Grace was bathed and read to, and tucked into her small bed, Hannah and Samuel sat on their porch and watched the stars come out. The night was cool, hinting at the winter to come, but they were warm beneath the blanket they shared. "I have something to tell you," Hannah said quietly. "That sounds serious." "It is. In a good way, I hope." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." Samuel went very still. "You're pregnant. About 2 months along, Dr. Hawkins thinks." "A baby." Samuel's voice was wondering. "Our baby. Our baby. Yours and mine." Hannah searched his face for any sign of unhappiness and found only joy. "I wasn't sure how you'd feel. We never really talked about having more children. I never thought I'd have any children." Samuel pulled her closer. "Grace feels like mine, but she isn't. Not by blood. This baby is yours in every way, just like Grace is yours in every way that matters." Samuel's hand came to rest on her still flat stomach, gentle and reverent. "I'm going to be a father." "You already are a father. You've been Grace's father since the moment you wrapped her in your coat." "I know, but this is different." He looked at her and his eyes were wet. "This is you and me, Hannah. This is something we made together. Are you happy? Happy doesn't even begin to cover it." He kissed her deep and tender. "I love you. I love Grace. And I already love this baby more than I can say." Hannah leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. A year ago, she had been running for her life, certain that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now she was sitting on her own porch, with her husband carrying their child, surrounded by a community that had welcomed her as one of their own. "Tell me again," she said softly, "about the day you found us. You've heard that story 100 times. I want to hear it again. I want to remember." Samuel smiled and began to speak, his voice low and warm in the darkness. He told her about the blizzard, about hearing Grace's cry, about finding them behind the mill. He told her about the desperate ride to town, about Doc Hawkins and Martha, about the moment he knew his life had changed forever. Hannah listened not because she needed to hear the facts, but because she needed to remember where they had started, how far they had come, what they had built from the ashes of her old life. "I made a choice that day," Samuel said when the story was finished. "I could have ridden past. Part of me wanted to. It was cold and I was tired, and getting involved in someone else's problems is always complicated. But you didn't ride past." "No, I heard Grace crying and something in me just shifted. I couldn't leave her there. Couldn't leave either of you." "Do you ever regret it?" "Getting involved in my problems." Samuel laughed softly. "Hannah, getting involved in your problems is the best thing I ever did. You've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A wife, a daughter, a baby on the way, a home, a purpose." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I was just existing before you. Now I'm living." "So am I." Hannah closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the peace that had become her new normal. "So am I." The winter that followed was harsh, but they were ready for it. Their house was solid, their supplies well stocked, their little family warm and safe against the cold. Grace celebrated her first birthday in December, surrounded by the friends and neighbors who had become their extended family. Hannah's school closed for the coldest months, but her students stopped by regularly to borrow books and practice their reading. She spent the quiet days preparing for the new baby, sewing tiny clothes and knitting blankets, feeling her child grow and move inside her. Sometimes, late at night, she would lie awake and marvel at how different her life had become. A year and a half ago, she had been a prisoner in her own home, beaten and afraid, certain that she would die without ever knowing what freedom felt like. Now she was a teacher, a wife, a mother. She had a husband who loved her, a daughter who adored her, and a future that stretched out bright and promising before her. The past wasn't erased. The scars remained both visible and hidden. There were still nights when the nightmares came, still moments when an unexpected sound or movement made her flinch. But those moments were fewer now and shorter, and always followed by the reminder that she was safe. She was home. In late February, with snow still thick on the ground, Hannah gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, but when it was over, when she held that small, squalling bundle in her arms, every moment of pain faded into insignificance. "He's beautiful," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion. "Hannah, he's perfect. He has your eyes. And your stubbornness, I expect." Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife, one finger tracing their son's tiny features. "What should we call him?" Hannah had been thinking about this for months. "Jacob, after your father." "I never knew my father." "I know. But you told me once that you wished you had, that you wondered what kind of man he was." She looked up at him. "This is our chance to find out, to raise a son and see what kind of man he becomes." Samuel's eyes were wet. "Jacob Thornton. Jacob Samuel Thornton. That's a lot of name for such a small person. He'll grow into it." Grace, who had been watching from Martha's arms, demanded to see her new brother. She peered at him with the intense curiosity of a toddler encountering something new, then pronounced her verdict. "Baby. Yes, sweetheart, that's your baby brother. Mine. Yours, and Mama's, and Papa's. He belongs to all of us." Grace considered this, then reached out and patted Jacob's head with surprising gentleness. "Nice baby." The room erupted in laughter, and Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. Happy tears. Grateful tears. The tears of a woman who had everything she had ever wanted, and more. The years that followed were not always easy. Life on the frontier was hard, full of challenges and setbacks and moments of fear. But through it all, the Thornton family remained strong. Samuel's livery prospered. Hannah's school grew until the town built a proper schoolhouse and hired her as the official teacher. Grace grew into a bright, fierce girl who reminded Hannah more of herself with each passing day. And Jacob, their miracle winter baby, grew into a thoughtful boy with his father's steady nature and his mother's stubborn courage. Cornelius Blackwood died in prison when Jacob was 3 years old. Hannah received the news with quiet acceptance, laying to rest the final ghost of her old life. She didn't mourn him, didn't celebrate either. She simply acknowledged that a chapter had closed and moved on. There were other challenges: droughts and floods, economic downturns that threatened everything they had built, moments of doubt and fear and uncertainty. But through it all, Hannah and Samuel faced them together, partners in every sense of the word. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Samuel found them in the blizzard. Hannah stood on the porch of their expanded house and watched her children play in the yard. Grace was 12 now, tall and beautiful, helping her 9-year-old brother build a snowman. Samuel stood beside her, his hair graying at the temples, his face lined with the years, but still handsome. Still the man who had appeared out of a storm and given her everything. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am." She slipped her hand into his. "I'm thinking about a baby crying in a blizzard and a cowboy who couldn't ride past. That was a long time ago. A lifetime ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday." She turned to face him. "Thank you, Samuel, for hearing her, for stopping, for choosing us. I'd choose you again." He kissed her softly. Every time, in every life, I'd always choose you. Hannah leaned into him, watching their children laugh in the snow, feeling the warmth of the home they had built together. She had been broken once, shattered into pieces by a man who believed he owned her. But she had put herself back together, had found someone who helped her heal, had created a life that was entirely her own. The girl who had stumbled through a blizzard, clutching her starving baby and praying for death, was gone. In her place stood a woman, a teacher, a wife, a mother. Someone who had stared into the darkness and found her way back to the light. The baby's cry had been the end of one story and the beginning of another, a story of survival and courage, of choosing hope when despair seemed easier, of finding love in the most unexpected places and building a family from the broken pieces of two lonely lives. Samuel had taken off his coat that day and wrapped it around a dying infant. In doing so, he had changed everything. And sometimes Hannah thought, as the sun set over the mountains and her family gathered close, that was all it took. One small act of kindness. One choice to stop instead of riding past. One moment of courage in the face of the storm. One person brave enough to listen when a baby cried. The rest was just living. Just loving. Just holding on to what mattered and never letting go. And Hannah Thornton never let go again.